Morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first lesson for an inspector course. We will be looking at Act 3 today. I appreciate that some of you may not have reached Act 3 in your classes. I have previously included on Show My Homework some Act summaries and analysis to get you up to speed. So the first things, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to do is to read the first 2.5 pages of Inspector Calls. So you're going from the beginning of Act 3 until the middle of page 52, where we have stage directions. He goes to open the door while Sheila takes her mother out, and then he closes it to come in. So you need to press pause until you have read that part, and then I will begin some analysis. Okay, so hopefully you have now read the first part of Act 3, and I am going to literally talk through it as I would if you were in a class with me. I need you to have a pencil and I need you to be annotating at the same time. So we begin Act 3 in exactly the same place as we ended Act 2. Eric has arrived inside the room and everybody is looking at him. Okay, so I will be skipping through parts and I will be discussing just the main conversations, the parts for you to annotate what it shows about the characters. There will be a series, in theory, of short lessons to enable you to do this. I will also be putting some character studies online and some questions for you to answer. But we're going to have a go at this today. So Eric has shut the door. He comes further in. Mrs. Burling is distressed. Eric, I can't believe it. There must be some mistake. She can't believe that her son has been involved in this type of thing. We know that the Burlings treat their children as children rather than young adults. And she believes that he cannot be involved in this kind of thing. And then Sheila goes on to explain to Eric that their mother has been blaming everything on the young man who got the girl into trouble. And actually now she's found out that it's Eric, she wishes that she could take it back. And Eric's quite bitter about this. He's not really had support from either of his parents through his life. He's still treated as a youngster. Mrs. Burling goes on to say, but I didn't know it was you. I never dreamt. Besides, you're not the type. You don't get drunk. So you're not the type. You don't get drunk. Shows how little she knows about her son. How little he is on her radar. And then Eric retaliates. He calls Sheila a sneak, but actually she is trying to stick up for him. She's doing it for her own good. And Sheila said, I could have told her months ago, but of course I didn't. So we see that Eric's drinking problem has been going on for months. Really, ever since his relationship with Eva. Okay. And then we move in slightly further than that. So Mrs. Burling, Sheila, I don't understand your attitude. Neither do I. If you'd had any sense of loyalty. So both Mrs. Burling and Mr. Burling are far more concerned about their reputation, about their sense of loyalty to each other, rather than the greater good. The idea of social responsibility that Priestley really wanted to inject in the audience is highlighted here, that neither Mr. or Mrs. Burling really have a care about anybody else but their own family. But the inspector is quite smooth. He's still in charge of this situation. Just a minute, Mr. Burling. There'll be plenty of time when I've gone for you to adjust your family relationships. And this shows us that the family relationship will change. The children will no longer be children. They are now young adults and they need to be treated as such. So Eric goes on. He's quite miserable now. Could I have a drink first? Mr. Burling explodes, no, but the inspector takes charge firmly, yes. As Burling looks like interrupting, I know he's your son and this is your house, but look at him. He needs a drink just now just to see him through. So the inspector is taking charge. He has charge of this role, and he's looking out for Eric. He sees that he needs that drink to steady his nerves, to calm him down. And then we have stage directions. Eric goes for a whiskey. His whole manner of handling the decanter and then the drink shows his familiarity with quick, heavy drinking. So this is Priestley showing us that Eric is a drinker. He's been finding solitude in alcohol. Okay, he's been drowning his sorrows from the relationship that he's had that's failed, from the stealing, which we will find out about later on, but this weight is on his shoulders. And now the inspector questions him. When did you meet this girl? And Eric then goes on to tell his story. Now what's interesting is we find out that Eric is in the Palace Bar. He was in the Palace Bar with his friends, and poor Eva had gone back there. So after her relationship with Gerald had failed, she'd gone back to the Palace Bar. And he got talking to her, he bought her a few drinks, and I was rather far gone by that time. We had to go. But she wasn't that drunk. A little bit, but not that drunk. So the inspector then questions Eric, and we're now at the bottom of page 51. Why had she gone there? She wasn't the usual sort. So again, we see more about Eva Daisy's character. She wasn't the sort to frequent the Palace Bar, and if you remember from previous analysis and lessons, the Palace Bar was frequented by prostitutes or by women that wanted to find themselves a partner, somebody that could set them up in a home. So Eva wasn't the usual sort, and she'd been told to go there. There was some woman who wanted her to go there. I never quite understood that. So Eva had been told to go there to earn some money. Eric shows his naivety because he doesn't understand that it would have been a madam or a brothel keeper that would have suggested that Eva could go there and earn some money. And Eric, although he feels that he's quite grown up, in some ways he's quite naive. He doesn't understand why she went there. And the inspector says, you went with her lodgings that night. Yes, I insisted, it seems. So it seems Eric, he's not sure. He was told afterwards. He's telling us he was quite drunk. I'm not very clear about that. But afterwards she told me. Okay, and then we go to page 52. But that, well, I was in a state when a chap easily turns nasty, I threatened to make a row. So this is Eric, who's very drunk, forcing himself on Eva. Okay, and she says that he can go into her house because he was going to make a fuss, he was going to make a row, and she didn't want to be embarrassed by her neighbours, by him in front of her neighbours. So she let you in. Yes. And that's when it happened. So he can't even bring himself to say the it. So that's when they had sex, and I didn't even remember. And you need to consider at this point whether he forced himself on her. And he describes it as a hellish thing. Oh my God, how stupid it all is. So Eric is really drunk. He's threatening to make trouble for Eva, so she lets him in. And that's when they have sex for the first time. Now, in today's society, it would be abhorrent to us. He's forcing himself on her. And there are two ways of looking at Eric, and you need to decide that. You maybe feel slightly sorry for himself. He's treated as a child by his parents. Does he need to prove himself to be a man? Or is it that he forced himself on Eva, he raped Eva because she was too polite to do anything other? And he describes it as a hellish thing. So he has guilt, and we have that idea that he has guilt around him. And oh my God, how stupid it all is. Mrs. Burling, oh Eric, with a cry, how could you? Now, is Mrs. Burling crying for Eric, or is she crying for her reputation? That's something that you need to consider. And Burling replies sharply, Sheila, take your mother along to the drawing room. So here we see gender roles, that Sheila shouldn't really be part of this conversation, and Burling wants both Sheila and Mrs. Burling to leave the room and go along to the drawing room. So again we're seeing Burling reinforce those gender roles. But Sheila protests and Burling is insistent, but he's quite gentle. Go on, Sybil. He goes on to open the door while Sheila takes her mother out, and then he closes it and comes in. Okay, so now what I would like you to do, please, ladies and gentlemen, is I would like you to read up until, let's just have a little look and see where we can do, up until, let's go to page 55, okay, with where the inspector says, towards the top of page 55, with calm authority. Okay, so again, ladies and gents, you need to press pause till you've got up to page 55, and then we'll go through there. Right, so Sheila and Mrs. Burling go out, and then we have a conversation directly between Eric and the inspector. And we learn that Eric met her again afterwards, not by appointment. Eric couldn't remember her name. He was so drunk he couldn't remember her name or where she lived. But he went again to the Palace Bar, suggesting that his drinking is kind of out of control, and he was drinking to kind of numb the pain. But he says this time it wasn't so bad. He took Eva home again, and this time we see their relationship build a little bit. This time we talked, but she told me something about herself. I talked too. I told her my name and what I did. And this time we have different phrasing. The inspector asks, and you made love again. So suggesting that this time it wasn't forced sex, that this time it would possibly suggest that it was more consensual. But Eric agrees, I wasn't in love with her or anything. I liked her. She was pretty and a good sport. So he doesn't really have feelings for her in that way. She was quite a nice girl, so I slept with her. So it shows Eric is quite a shallow individual, and Burling's quite harsh about this, so you had to go to bed with her. And Eric's quite insistent in this. I'm old enough to be married, but I'm not married, and I don't like these fat old tarts around town, the ones I see with your respectable friends. And so Eric's saying to his father that your friends are out with these women that are plainly making money, and I'm not that type of individual. And possibly he wanted some kind of relationship with Eva, but whether we decide that his relationship is not going well with his parents, he's looking for it somewhere else. And then Burling, he's still quite angry. Don't talk about my friends like that. But the inspector tells Mr. Burling that they need to settle their family differences afterwards. So we move to the top of page 53. Sorry, I know I'm not moving the camera down with it all the time, and also know that it's not necessarily in focus. So Eric then tells us the story, okay? So, and the next time, or after that, she told me she thought she was going to have a baby. She wasn't sure. And Eric now declares he was in a hell of a state about it, all right? Consider how he's worried that his parents would find out. And the inspector wants to know whether Eva suggested they marry, and this shows us something about Eva's character. Eric tells us she didn't want to marry, he didn't love her, and she felt that you needed that kind of relationship, and she didn't want to make Eric marry her. She was quite a righteous and individual, and she didn't believe in having to marry for the sake of it. But contextually, that's what people did. People in 1912, they married if they found out that they were pregnant. There was not this idea that you marry for love. We know that because Sheila and Gerald's relationship is not necessarily one of love, it's more one of convenience. Mr. Burling wants to build his business with Gerald's father's business, and by matching these two individuals together, you'll see it being mutually beneficial for the Crofts and the Burlings, but not necessarily one for love for Gerald and Sheila. So we learn that Eric gives her money. So Eva has been given money by Gerald previously, and now Eric gives her money. But at some point she refused, and we learn that from the middle of page 53 until she refused. How much did you give her? £50 altogether. And Burling is outraged. £50 was a lot of money in 1912, and Eric becomes rather embarrassed by this, and he's quite miserable. He tells us that he stole the money from the office, and Burling is angry, and Eric is embarrassed. And Mrs. Burling and Sheila come back into the room, and Sheila states that it's not her fault, and Mrs. Burling needs to know what's happening. But Burling, he's so cross, he's absolutely livid. So we have the stage directions at the bottom of page 53. Savagely. Well, I can't tell you what's happening. He's admitted he was responsible for the girl's condition. So using the word condition, not pregnancy, as well. Something to be ashamed of, a condition like an illness, and that we learned that Mr. Burling tells Mrs. Burling he stole the money. I'm going to skip a few lines because I feel like I'm just kind of repeating myself. But we go to the middle of page 54, all right, and we have a conversation between Burling and Eric, and Burling calls his son a damned fool, all right. So why didn't you come to me when you found yourself in this mess? So the idea of this relationship with Eva, the fact she's pregnant, Burling calls it as a mess. And then we have a statement from Eric, because you're not the kind of father a chap would go to when he's in trouble. So this is a classic statement from Burling. It shows us all about the relationship that Sheila and Eric have with their parents. The fact that they don't have a relationship with their parents. Their parents treat them like children. We see that at the beginning when both Sheila and Eric refer to their parents as mummy and daddy. We see that move as we move through the acts, because they then begin to refer to them as mother and father, and they take that responsibility, the two Burling children, and grow as individuals, taking that social responsibility, accepting the guilt for their involvement, shows that they are adapting, that they are changing, but their relationship remains poor with their parents. And Mr. Burling is angry. Don't talk to me like that. The trouble is you're spoiled. But how is Eric spoiled? He's not spoiled with love and affection and a stable family. He's spoiled materially. He's spoiled by just walking straight into a job. And is that a good basis for family life? Is that a good basis for a relationship with your family? And now the inspector tells us, my trouble is I haven't much time. So this is our first indication that the inspector is not going to be with us for much longer. And you'll be able to divide the responsibility between you when I've gone. So the responsibility should be divided. Every single member of the Burling and household and Gerald have responsibility. All played a part in Eva's death. And Eric is miserable from it. Yes, that was the worst of all. She wouldn't take any more and didn't want to see me again. Suddenly startled tone, but you knew that already. So he realises, he understands there's something else going on within this, and that's when Mrs. Burling has to confess. And Eric realises she told you she came here. She came here, but then he realises she couldn't have done. And Mrs. Burling is distressed and shakes her head. And this is the first time really that we see, top of page 55, that we see Mrs. Burling depressed. Okay, possibly beginning to take some acceptance for her responsibility. And the inspector explains that Sheila went to the committee, and Eric. We have this tirade of frustration come from Eric, middle of page 55. He's almost at breaking point now. He's taken all this responsibility for himself, but actually he realises it's not just him. So, then you killed her. She came to you to protect me, and you turned her away. So first things first, we have all these dashes. We have these longer pauses where he's gathering his anger. The dashes symbolise the rage that's building inside her. We have the repetition of killed. Alright, you killed her, you killed her. Eric is so cross, and then he makes it worse, or he highlights it more, the fact that the child she has, his child, his own grandchild, you killed them both. So we have the repetition there of killed, we have the repetition of child, we have the dashes which show the anger that's building inside of him, and we have the cursing at the end, damn you, which in today's society isn't great swearing.